Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of 10 to Life with me, Annie Elise. Now, I think it's fair to say that if you're here watching this video today, you probably appreciate or enjoy true crime stories. And obviously you're not alone. I mean, we all know how popular this genre is becoming. I mean, whether we're talking about a podcast, a documentary, a TV show, or a whole channel like what I've got here, I mean, if you want to keep up with the world of true crime, there are tons of different ways to do that. And honestly, who doesn't love watching a good mystery unfold? Not the crime itself, but trying to solve the mystery as it's happening. But I'm wondering, have you ever wondered if anybody is watching this kind of stuff for all the wrong reasons? Like, what if somebody wanted to figure out how to get away with the perfect crime? I mean, all of the information that's out there, every detail about how the killers get caught and the different methods that the police use, I mean, it almost can feel like we're creating a textbook on how to commit the worst crimes that you can imagine and never get caught. Well, let me just say that after researching today's case, I don't have to wonder anymore. Because today we're talking about a very chilling story from back in 2018. So get ready, we're gonna dive right into it. Today's episode is sponsored by PDS Debt. Now, I have told you guys before, it feels like getting in debt is so easy, but getting out of it is really difficult. It almost feels like the system is set up so that we don't get out of debt. But I'm here to tell you that you don't have to go at it alone. There is a way out. Help is available, all thanks to PDS Debt. PDS Debt has customized options available for anybody who is struggling with medical bills, credit cards, personal loans, you name it.
PDS Debt strives to understand your specific scenario, and they can help provide alternative solutions to becoming debt-free. I wish I knew about this program sooner because it would have saved me a lot of stress and a lot of money back when I was younger and less financially responsible. But I'm sharing them now with you so that hopefully they can help you. Stop waiting and start saving.
PDS Debt is also offering our viewers a free debt analysis. It only takes 30 seconds, and all you have to do is head to pdsdebt.com/10tolife. That's pdsdebt.com/10tolife for a free debt assessment today. I'm telling you, you guys, it has helped me tremendously, and it will help you too. Check it out. In 2018, 26-year-old Brandy Odom was a stunning young woman with beautiful brown eyes, dark skin. She truly had one of those very genuine smiles, the kind that make you feel like she was having fun no matter what, no matter where she was. She worked a security job on Long Island, New York, and everybody who knew Brandy loved being around her because she had this very ambitious, go-getter personality. She had been raised in the Crown Heights neighborhood of Brooklyn, but she eventually moved to a neighborhood in Queens called Rosedale, and it isn't too far away. It's actually pretty close. I used to live in Brooklyn. Queens isn't far away at all. Now, you would think that it was a very loud and crazy area, especially being part of New York City, but Rosedale is actually kind of the opposite. It's known to be on the quieter side, including when it comes to crime. It's actually pretty safe. Now, while she lived there, Brandy had two roommates, 31-year-old Cory Martin and 30-year-old Adelle Anderson. And even though it had been a while since she had moved away from home, and even though she was known to be kind of quiet, kind of stick to herself, Brandy still loved spending time with her extended family, especially since they didn't live too far away. She particularly loved hanging out with her aunt and her cousins in Brooklyn. They would just bring out a different side of Brandy when they were all together on the weekends. They would be cooking Indian food, laughing, they'd have reggae music playing in the background, and family was really important to Brandy, especially since she had lost her father when she was younger. She wanted to stay close to whatever relatives she had left. And on top of that, Brandy was a really high achiever. She was always trying to figure out the best way to do well in her life. I mean, she wanted to have a better future for herself than the one that she had as a child, because she did go through a pretty rough patch when she was younger. She had dropped out of high school in 2010, but she still wanted to continue her education because she loved learning. So she even joined Job Corps, which is a low-income job training program, and this was for a 6-month class to become a medical administrator. Now, that career didn't end up panning out for her, so Brandy was thinking about becoming a hairstylist or maybe a school safety officer. She was accepted to cosmetology school, but luckily for her, right around the same time, the NYPD had reached out asking if she wanted a position in her other dream job, a school safety officer. Now, the funny thing was that Brandy had actually applied for the job 2 years earlier. She made it all the way to taking an exam and passing it with flying colors, but then she never showed up for processing. And that wasn't totally out of character for her, because even given how ambitious she was, Brandy could be a little bit flaky. You would think that ghosting a job opportunity like that, though, would count against her, but the NYPD was so impressed with everything else about her application and her interview that they called her 2 years later when they had an opening, saying, hey, if you're still interested, do you want to be a part of the team? You want to join the team? So by early spring of 2018, Brandy had some options. She wasn't quite sure what she wanted to do next, though, because on top of all of that, she was also passionate about becoming a flight attendant. Hairdresser, flight attendant, school safety officer. I mean, she wanted to dabble in literally everything. And I know it's kind of hard to keep up with everything she has going on, but that's just how Brandy was. She was a dreamer. But sometimes all of those different dreams made her come across as a little scattered and kind of all over the place. Like I said, she also could be a little bit flaky. Her passions were pulling her in so many different directions that she just couldn't focus on any of them long enough to actually move forward. She had this pattern where she might disappear for a couple of days at a time, not answering calls or texts or telling anyone what she was up to. Then she would come back, everything would be fine. And it happened often enough that her family didn't even worry if she seemed to be out of touch for long periods of time. It was just Brandy being Brandy. Now, Brandy's mom, Nicole, heard from her in March of 2018 when Brandy told her about the school safety position. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary during that call either. Nicole told Brandy that she was super proud of her. Brandy told her mom that she loved her. It was just your typical mother-daughter conversation. Nothing to worry about. They had a close relationship, but they didn't talk all the time by any means either, so it wasn't unusual when Nicole didn't hear from Brandy again for a while afterward. Like I said, she kind of had a long history of doing exactly that. Then Brandy texted one of her friends randomly a few days or weeks later on April 1st saying, I'm proud of you. Just know that everything is okay with me. Now, it was a weird thing to say out of nowhere because she wasn't replying to anything, but her friend just figured that Brandy was going through something, maybe something small, but nothing too serious. So she, like everybody else, didn't think much about it. She also didn't think much about it when she didn't hear from Brandy for a while after that message. Like I said, it was kind of just sort of her thing for her. And it actually took a while for anybody to notice that she had been out of contact for a lot longer than usual. Around early April, one neighbor even sort of stopped one day and realized that they hadn't seen Brandy coming and going from her house for quite some time. But it still didn't seem like a big or urgent enough deal for anybody to investigate it further. Then, around dinner time on Monday, April 9th, 2018, a woman was out walking her dog in Canarsie Park at East 86th Street and Seaview Avenue. All of a sudden, she saw something kind of strange buried in the leaves in a wooded area about 15 feet from the path that she was walking on. Now, at first, she thought that it was a black garbage bag and figured somebody had just been littering. I mean, if you ever lived in New York, even Brooklyn, there's trash everywhere, guys. Take my word for it. It actually is kind of comforting when I go back there and smell the hot sewage. Gross, I know, but that's just what she figured it was. But then the closer that she looked, the more she realized that it wasn't a black garbage bag at all. It was actually spiky black hair. Then, as she got even closer and got a better look, she saw that it was a woman's head, and it was also an unclothed torso, lying face down. The legs had been cut off at the hips, and the arms had been cut off at the elbows. But the woman walking the dog couldn't see where the limbs were, if they were even around. It's not like the lady was looking all that hard for them. I mean, I would have to imagine that she was pretty freaked out and not thinking super logically. But then another person came along, and he also didn't have a great reaction to this. Not that anybody normally would, but his first thought was that the body was so small that it almost seemed like a doll to him. But then he quickly snapped back to reality, and he realized that they had actually stumbled upon a real person's dead body. Now, at that point, the woman who saw the body first freaked the hell out, and she called 911. When the police arrived at the scene, they began taping off the park with yellow caution tape, and they started their investigation. When they got a close look at the body's face, they saw that it was swollen. It was bruised. So over the rest of the day and into the evening, police were scouring the area for the rest of the body and also for more clues, more evidence. But it wasn't until the following day that the woman's arms and legs were found. They had been in different trash bags which were scattered all throughout the entire park. They also found a bloody saw in a trash can that was also in that park. So when the local news outlets were breaking the news that a dismembered female body had been discovered, it was a shock to the community. It's not like Canarsie Park was known to have any sort of crime or violence. It was very quiet. People felt safe. It was actually a historic park with a very long history. A bunch of people figured that the victim must have been killed somewhere else, and then they were dismembered and they were dumped there after the fact. It was the only explanation given how busy the park was. It was springtime in New York City, so it was wildly assumed that the body must have been dumped there recently. Someone surely would have found it sooner if it had been put there any earlier in the month. People were always walking in the park. It was so nice out. Now, this was on top of the fact that the body wasn't very badly decomposed when it was found either. If it was lying outdoors where insects or animals could get at it, for example, the police would have found it in much worse condition when they got called to the scene initially. But that was all that they could figure out at that point, that the murder had been recent, and that it probably happened somewhere else. Otherwise, the police knew almost nothing about the crime. They had no idea whose body it was. However, she did have 5-inch braids and a very unique tattoo of the word chocolate on her left breast. So those features seemed notable enough that they thought that someone might be able to recognize them and help identify her. So they put out a call for information to the public in hopes that somebody would be able to connect the dots on who this woman was. And someone actually did. When Brandy's mom, Nicole, heard about the distinctive tattoo on the young woman that was found in the park, her gut told her to call the police. Not only had she not heard from Brandy in a little while, but just like the body in the park, Brandy also had the word chocolate tattooed on her breast. So unfortunately, after Nicole called the NYPD and sent them a photo of Brandy, they confirmed the worst. The body was her daughter. But now the question was, who in the world would have done something so brutal and so twisted to Brandy? She wasn't known to have any enemies. Everybody loved her. So this obviously wasn't some random mugging gone wrong either. Given all the brutal things that the killer did to her body after she was dead, there had to be more to the story here. Sadly, yes, people are murdered every single day. Dismembered, though? Not so much. That's a whole extra layer of, barbaric behavior. And the weird thing was that you would think that a scene that shocking would make all kinds of headlines. But instead, the crime barely got any coverage. Lots of people at the time said that they barely even knew what had happened, let alone that they had identified the victim or that her name was Brandy Odom. The lack of press made some New Yorkers think that maybe racial bias was at play. The argument was that imagine if it was a white woman found dismembered in a park with murderers still on the loose. It would likely have been a front-page story with around-the-clock reporting until the killer was found. The NYPD said that they were treating Brandy's case as if she was any other New Yorker, though, but they still got a lot of criticism for it, and they still come under fire to this very day for the same reason. By that next Thursday, just a few days after Brandy was found dead, a vigil was held at the park in Brandy's honor, and also to bring awareness to the situation. Her family wanted justice.
If you have any sympathy in your heart for my daughter, my family, her friends, her uncles, please just come forward and give yourself up.
Nicole went on to criticize the NYPD for basically the same reason that so many other people were. She said, they don't care. They move slower when it comes to African Americans. But if she was a Caucasian child, somebody would be locked up already. But then the NYPD fired back, saying that they were working nonstop to solve the murder, and they were also offering an award of $12,000 for anybody who had any information that would lead to an arrest and a conviction. Either way, the NYPD was investigating the case and looking more into who Brandy was as a person, really just trying to figure out anything that could help them possibly piece together what had happened. Nicole had said that Brandy never got into any trouble with the police, but that wasn't exactly true. She was arrested back in 2012 for loitering with suspicions of sex work. I don't know if she really was doing sex work at the time or if that was a trumped-up charge, but either way, it sounds like nothing ever came from that arrest. Not that it really meant anything in terms of the investigation, but it did kind of show a disconnect between Brandy's life and whether her family knew everything about her, everything that was involved in it. Brandy's mother didn't even realize that she had been arrested, which was a big thing to not know about your own daughter. She also never knew that Brandy had more than one roommate. And like I mentioned before, Brandy actually had 2. She wasn't even sure if Brandy had a boyfriend or not. Now, apparently, Brandy had recently told a friend that she was involved with some guy who lived on Long Island. But she also said that he had been very violent against her. But when her friend asked for more details about who the guy was, Brandy she shut down. And again, she really kept to herself in a lot of ways and liked to keep her life private, even with her close friends. So this meant that the police did not have a whole lot of information to work with, even from the very beginning of all of this. And even though the investigation felt like it wasn't going anywhere, Brandy's family now had at least known that she had been identified, so they wanted to honor her. She was laid to rest on Thursday, April 26, 2018. 500 people attended her funeral at Brown Memorial Baptist Church in Brooklyn. She was buried in an all-white casket, and she was surrounded by wreaths and wreaths of white flowers. After the funeral, her mom, Nicole, spoke to the media again about Brandy. And this time she said, "Brandy was a premature baby who almost didn't make it at birth and the days afterward. I saw her as a fighter from the time that she was born. Her life showed me that she was meant to be. My 26 years with her was a blessing. I wanted a dark-complexioned child, and that's why I called her Chocolate." That same day, the NYPD came forward with the shocking news that they hadn't received a single tip related to Brandy's case, which was surprising because not only had her body been dumped in such a busy area, but there was a pretty decent reward going on at that point too. It really did seem like maybe Nicole's complaints were right, and maybe the police hadn't done enough to raise awareness about Brandy's murder, because you would think if a bunch of people knew about it, surely somebody would come forward with something. And that's what the police thought too. They said that they were still hoping that somebody had tips to share with them, even if it was something that seemed small, something that might not look like a big deal to somebody on the outside, but might end up breaking the whole thing open for the detectives. But in the meantime, they were trying to build a timeline of when she was killed, when she was dismembered, when it got dumped, everything. They figured out that Brandy was last seen at home where she lived with her two roommates, Cory and Adele. So the police called both of them in to question them. And during one of those sessions, Cory made some suspicious statements. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the statements were, but the police said that they were, quote, incriminating. Now, whatever Cory said, it was enough for the detectives to pull a search warrant for Brandy's house. And during their search, a cadaver dog picked up on Brandy's scent in Cory's truck. So this made the police think that not only was Cory involved, but that he might have used that exact same truck to drive Brandy's remains to the park. The detectives also got a hold of surveillance footage from the neighborhood, and it showed Cory backing his truck into his driveway and putting in big black garbage bags into the back of it. And maybe you're thinking, so what? Backing a truck into a driveway doesn't seem like that big of a deal. Well, the reason that this was so strange was because Cory never backed his truck into the driveway. He always drove in front end first. And of course, as we know, Brandy's limbs were also found in black garbage bags at the park. Bags that looked an awful lot like the ones that Cory was seen loading into his truck. There was also surveillance footage of Cory leaving the park that Brandy's body was found at. He was carrying a suitcase, which the police believed had Brandy's torso inside, before Cory must have dumped it and then covered it up with leaves. Now, as for why Cory would want to hurt Brandy, well, more was coming out about Brandy's relationship. Not only the relationship with him, but the relationship with the other roommate, Adele. See, they weren't ordinary roommates or even friends who just decided to live together to save on rent. It turned out that Cory was Brandy's pimp, and Adele was her madam, and Adele was also doing sex work. Now, I want to be clear, Cory and Adele didn't force or encourage Brandy to get into sex work. She had been making money that way for a while before she ever even met either one of them. In fact, in 2014, Brandy was doing it while also couch surfing with some different friends and different family members. She didn't really have a stable place to live or sleep. Her mom found out how she was making a living and she wanted to help her, and she figured that having her move in with her sister, who didn't have that kind of lifestyle, would maybe help get her back on track. But while Brandy was living with her sister in her apartment, Adele was staying in that same building a floor below. The two women were both doing sex work at the time, and once they realized that they had that in common, they really hit it off with one another. After a little while, Brandy and Adele became so close that they moved in together. And I don't know exactly what happened after that. Maybe they weren't able to make rent or something like that, but then in 2016, they moved into Cory's house, and they started doing their work there. Adele knew Cory from high school, and the two of them had kind of been in this on and off again relationship. And it's safe to say it was more off than on, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But Cory's home was not a peaceful place for Adele and Brandy to live. A neighbor said that she heard fighting and punching sounds throughout her bedroom wall, not just once or twice, but often. She also said that the police had been to the home a couple of times, and both times Cory left in handcuffs. His most recent arrest was just a few months before Brandy was murdered, back in January of 2018, and that arrest was for a domestic incident. Other charges from that night included assault and also menacing with a weapon. Adele told the police that night that Cory had punched her in the face multiple times and also choked her, saying, "I will kill you and your son and slit your throat." I mean, it was volatile, to say the least. There were literally holes all through the house because of Cory just throwing punches at Adele and missing when she ducked out of the way. It was just beyond a toxic place to live. But in spite of all of that, Brandy stayed there for more than a year before she was then found dead in that park. On top of all of that, Cory controlled just about every aspect of both Brandy and Adele's lives. All the way from when they showered to what they ate. He wouldn't let them wear clothes at home, like they were just eye candy for him. They had to be nude. He didn't want them showering ever either because apparently he had this fetish for them to stay dirty. And he also forced them to call him daddy. I mean, truly, very, very controlling. He also wouldn't let them look other men in the eyes while he was ever around. It was very weird, very scary, very controlling, as I said. So now that the police knew all of this, there was quite a bit of suspicion surrounding Cory. But the detectives questioned him, and right away, he of course asked for his attorney. Now, of course, that was his right, so while they waited for his lawyer to show, they also talked to Adele to see if maybe that she would give them anything instead. But she asked for a lawyer as well. So when it was clear that neither one of them was going to talk freely, the police decided to just let both of them go. They didn't have enough evidence to hold them, and I'm guessing that they didn't feel like they'd get anything useful from an interrogation with a lawyer sitting right there in the room with them. The good news is, though, that even without their statements, new evidence did finally start rolling in. First, Brandy's autopsy report was released, and it said that she had died from homicidal asphyxiation. Basically, somebody had strangled her to death. It also said that Brandy was dismembered after she was murdered, which, thank God, because I can't imagine how terrible it would be to have to go through something like that while you're still alive. The report also said that the cuts were, quote, ragged, irregular, and focally dried, which in ordinary everyday language means that whoever did this to Brandy tried to dry the blood at some point as well. The important thing was the ragged and the irregular part of the description, which matched up to the way that a reciprocating saw would cut into something. A reciprocating saw is one of those handheld power saws that you use for like home remodeling, and that was also the exact kind of bloody saw that the police found in one of the trash cans at the park. So now they had the murder weapon, the autopsy. However, none of that implicated Cory or Adele or anybody else. So it was going to take a lot more investigation before the detectives would be able to make an actual arrest. But that investigation did not move quickly. The weeks turned into months, which turned into years, and the case went cold. Nobody was talking about Brandy or who could have killed her. But I want to be clear, it's not like the police stopped investigating because they didn't know what to do next. I mean, it was almost the opposite. They were pretty sure that they already knew who the killer was, Cory, Adele, or both of them working together. And as for the motive, the detectives thought that one or both of them was committing insurance fraud. The plan was pretty complicated, and I'll get into that later, but for now, it's just important to know that it took the police a very long time to get all of their evidence together. And that's why it was years before anybody was arrested. But the investigator spoke to Adele at the end of October of 2020, asking her about the fraud. And at that point, Adele spilled everything. It turned out that Cory and Adele had been planning this whole thing for a while, starting all the way back sometime around March 2017, about a year before the actual murder. So first, they applied for life insurance in Brandy's name with the company Globe Life in New York. The application was for a $50,000 life insurance policy. Now, usually you can't take out a life insurance policy on somebody you barely know or a casual acquaintance like a roommate. But when they filed all the forms and filled them out, Adele said that she was Brandy's sister, and she also said that she was Brandy's beneficiary. Adele then forged Brandy's signature on the application, and she dated it as March 28, 2017. A month later, in April of 2017, Adele called Globe Life, pretending to be Brandy, and she was asking about the policy. Are there any updates? After the representative confirmed some of the information, she let her know that her application had been approved. She had an active policy for $50,000. So Adele called Globe Life again a month later in June and once again pretended to be Brandy. She asked if her payment on the premium had gone through, and Globe Life said it had and that they had received it on June 2nd. And it kind of kept going on like that. Every couple months or so, Adele would call to make sure that her payments were going through and that the policy was still active, just doing all the things to make sure that she was still going to get this massive payday. And in October of 2017, she even pretended to be Brandy when she asked if she could make a payment a month early. Then, toward the end of the year, Adele called and said she needed to update some of the information on the account, including an email and a phone number. She also said that she wanted to pay as soon as possible, which I will say is a little weird because she was submitting these payments early, time after time, which wouldn't change the payout on the policy when Brandy died. But maybe she was trying to make it look like she was just like this super friendly customer because she knew what was going to be coming next. I don't know. But in the beginning of December, Adele ended up texting Cory and she said, "Insurance place closed today, and that policy is no longer going to be active if you don't try and do something with that bitch this week." Well, right after that conversation, Cory and Adele signed up for another life insurance policy under Brandy's name. Not to replace the earlier one, which was still active in spite of what Adele had said in that December text message, but it was now a second one on top of the original. This time, it was with the American National Life Insurance Company of New York, and it was a much bigger plan. It now had a payout of $150,000. So between that first policy, which was worth $50,000, and the new one at $150,000, Cory and Adele ended up going for a combined total of $200,000, all without Brandy ever even realizing that they had bought insurance in her name. How scary is that? Now, one thing that didn't change with this new policy was that Adele listed herself as Brandy's sister again. They linked a Capital One bank account too, which belonged to Brandy. This was for the payments. They also used Western Union money orders in her name, which at first I was a little confused about because if they were using Brandy's card to make the payments, wouldn't she have seen that on her bank statement? Well, as it turns out, there was surveillance footage that would have that answer. There was footage from March of 2018 that showed Cory at a Capital One bank in Rosedale using her card. So he was either completely in control of her money, or he had used her information to open up these accounts in her name and she didn't even know about them. Then on December 28th, Cory texted Adele saying, "Don't forget to call them people." Adele sent a reply that said, "Yes, I'm going to do it ASAP. Send me the social security number again just in case, please." When Cory asked why she didn't have it already, Adele just said, "Never mind, I'll ask her." Which, how insane is that? She was literally asking Brandy for information that would ultimately lead to her murder. And that's not a normal thing to ask your roommate. It's not like, "Hey, where'd you put the pasta away? I don't see it in the cabinet." I mean, there's no legitimate reason that you would need somebody's social security number. Unless you're stealing from them or unless you're doing something super shady with their money. I mean, it's bad news. Don't ever give your social out, folks. Never to anyone. But I think it just goes to show how truly under his control Brandy was with both Cory and Adele, because she told Adele what she wanted to know. And I guess Cory and Adele felt good about the fact that Brandy wasn't suspicious because they took their time actually following through on this murder plan. For a whole year, they were paying these policies and just waiting for the perfect moment. And get this, they also studied how to get away with murder. They started watching the true crime show The First 48 because each episode followed homicide detectives for 48 hours after they started an investigation, which that's where the title comes from, but it was full of all of this information about what sort of evidence the police look for in those crucial early hours. So Cory and Adele watched it for ideas on how not to get caught by the police. And it also didn't stop there. Cory loved the show Dexter, the show about the serial killer who was constantly killing people and getting away with it. And Cory used that show for inspiration about how to dispose of Brandy's body. And it makes a lot of sense now when you think back because Brandy was found dismembered at the park, which was eerily similar to what the character Dexter Morgan did in the show. But it also just illustrates the bigger thing of like what kind of information can perpetrators get from consuming this kind of content. Not only what kind of information to get away with a crime, but what kind of information to drive them to do a crime. So after studying up on all of their crime shows, at 4:36 p.m. on April 6th, Cory searched online at the Home Depot website for a DeWalt 12-amp corded reciprocating saw. That same day, he went on YouTube looking up how to insert blade for reciprocating saw. And he also was searching using reciprocating saw. And then after he watched those videos, he deleted his searches. Then Cory went into Brandy's bedroom in early April 2018, and he strangled her to death. Now, as for where Adele was during all of this, well, get this. she actually just had a baby girl. Cory's baby, actually. And Cory sent her and the baby over to her mom's house while he took care of Brandy. Adele knew about the murder. She knew about the plan, and she agreed to the plan. After he strangled Brandy to death, Cory sent Adele a text message with a coded message. It said something about a pair of black Ugg boots, which Adele knew was supposed to mean that the job was done and Brandy was dead. Then the two of them met up and they went to the Green Acres Mall on Long Island so that they could get a vacuum and also some cleaning products. Then, because nothing works up an appetite like murder, they also picked up some Red Lobster takeout and went back to the house. When they got back to the house together, Cory took Adele upstairs to the bedroom to show her Brandy's lifeless body, prove what he had done. It was still lying there even after they had done all of their shopping, all of their eating, everything. He even had cracked open the window ahead of time to air out the smell. Now, sometime after he ran those Google searches on the saws, Cory had went and bought them. And before he used them now, he had Adele line the entire bathroom in big black garbage bags. Then he laid Brandy's body in the tub on top of the garbage bags, and he began sawing her limbs off and dismembering her body. Now, it took a couple of days for Cory to get Brandy completely dismembered. And at one point he said to Adele, "This shit is hard. I've never chopped up a body before, but this is like a meaty area and it's giving me some trouble." I mean, just clear, zero remorse, none whatsoever. Like saying, "Oh, this is meaty, it's giving me trouble." It's so beyond horrific to think about. It is truly disgusting. It wasn't until super early on the morning of April 8th that Cory and Adele even started dumping Brandy at the park. But they didn't take everything on the same day. Kind of how it took them a few days to cut her up, it also took them a couple of days to get everything spread out at the park. So they came back on the 9th to finish the job. And as we know, Cory was spotted on park surveillance cameras leaving the park on that day, the 9th. The day after that, Cory began Googling a bunch of keywords related to Brandy's body, basically trying to see if she had been found yet. One article he accessed was titled, "Search Area Expands After Dismembered Body is Found in Canarsie Park in Brooklyn." He also went on Twitter and he clicked on a post which read, "Person walking dog discovers remains of woman in Brooklyn Park." Now, I mean, it is possible that he was curious if the police were on his trail and if they were going to catch him, but to me it almost feels like he was proud of himself and he enjoyed seeing how hard it was for the police to find any evidence about the murder. Like all of his binging of true crime shows finally paid off. Now, this theory is pretty much true, I would say, too, because just a few days after he dumped Brandy's body, he went on YouTube and he typed in, "Exclusive interview of mother of girl found in park." So, not only was he taking pleasure in what he had done, he was also taking pleasure in watching Brandy's family suffer. A true, sick, filthy dirtbag. It is all absolutely sick. And on top of all of that, he was also looking up luxury car reviews because I guess he was already thinking about how to spend all of his money before he even got a check to cash for that life insurance policy. Now, the reason he hadn't gotten any payout yet was because Adele was being very careful. She was waiting long enough to not draw any suspicion. She didn't want to call the insurance company too soon and make them ask questions like, "How do you know Brandy's dead? What's going on here?" So she waited exactly 17 days before calling the first company, the one that had that smaller $50,000 life insurance policy. The insurance rep asked Adele if Brandy's death was, quote, natural, an accident, homicide, or self-inflicted. And Adele said, the third one. Now, because Brandy's policy was so new, Adele had bought it less than 2 years ago, Adele was supposed to provide the certified death certificate, also a coroner's statement, and a doctor's statement, all to prove that everything was legit. All of which we know Adele was unable to do for obvious reasons. Even once Brandy's body was found and identified, Adele wasn't actually her family member. She couldn't just march into Brandy's mom's house and ask her for all of this sensitive paperwork. Now, even though she didn't have any of the proof that they needed, she kept calling this agency asking for updates. But because she never sent anything in that they had asked for her, she never got the payment. I mean, she wasn't going to get the payment. By the end of that June, I guess she was now getting desperate because she called the company once again and she said, "The family member that had a policy with you guys has passed." And here's how the rest of that phone call went. How did she pass? Somebody did it to her. So it's a homicide? Hate saying it. It's unbelievable. And your name? My name is Adele Anderson. And your relation? That's my sister. What's the name of the funeral home that was used? I don't know. I didn't have anything to do with the funeral for her. I'm not sure. And that was the majority of the call. And then the next day, Adele emailed her ID to the insurance claims department to try and confirm that she was the sole beneficiary for Brandy's insurance plan. But again, she never sent in any proper paperwork to actually cash out on either of the policies. So the entire scheme, it's just wild. And it's kind of shocking that it did take the police as long as it did to catch on to them, because they didn't do a great job at covering their tracks. Not at all. Not to mention, I would think that Adele was just a walking red flag to the insurance company. I know that some families can be complicated. People can be estranged from their relatives, but you would think that if somebody was close enough to their sister to be the sole beneficiary on her insurance plan, that person would at the very least know which funeral home took care of the body afterward, right? Of course, when Adele finally did get arrested and confessed to everything, she tried to make it sound like it was all Cory's fault, not hers. She also said that she lived in fear of Cory. Now, I'm assuming that she was trying to paint the picture that she was forced into helping out with the murder because she was just so afraid. But it doesn't sound like the police were buying any of that, because 1 week later, they arrested both Adele and Cory in New Jersey. That same day, they had their bail hearing via video. Adele ended up being let out on a $200,000 bond, but Cory stayed behind bars. Adele later ended up taking a plea deal that following year for the charges of identity theft, wire fraud, and murder for hire. In exchange, she testified against Cory during his trial, and his trial began in February of 2024, and it lasted for 2 weeks. Not once during the entire trial did Cory look at Brandy's family, who were all sitting in the gallery. It started with the prosecution's opening statement, talking about what the jury would hear when it came to Cory murdering Brandy, and also the steps that he took afterward to cover his tracks. They presented all of the phone data and video surveillance footage of him researching the crime in advance, coming and going from the park, the Home Depot, all of it. But Cory's defense painted a different picture of what went down, with a very interesting theory. They said that it wasn't actually Cory who murdered Brandy. It was Adele. And it was due to a very nasty love triangle between the three of them. His lawyer said Adele grew to dislike her, and by the time of Brandy's murder, Adele hated her. That's motive. Cory didn't even know her that well. He didn't have a reason to hate her. Brandy had sexual relations with 2 of Adele's children's fathers, which, crazy, right? Can you say slut-shaming? I can't. And given everything we know at this point, it's just not probable. But the lawyer said that at some point toward the end of Brandy's life, she and Cory were having a physical relationship. And that apparently made Adele very jealous. She fought with Brandy a couple of times, but apparently in the end, she ultimately decided to kill her. But this doesn't make any sense if you remember that neighbor who told the police that all the way back at the start of the investigation, she had heard a lot of fighting at Brandy, Adele, and Cory's place. Because if Adele and Cory just wanted Brandy dead for the money, you'd think that they wouldn't argue so much. They wouldn't want the situation at home to get so bad that Brandy decided to move out so they would lose their chance of hurting her. But if jealousy was a factor, Brandy and Adele might have gotten into these fights pretty frequently, even though it wasn't a great move in terms of the whole murder plan. Adele had multiple children, and I couldn't find anything about the other baby daddies that Brandy might have slept with, but as we know, Cory did father one of Adele's children. And like I said, the 2 of them had a very on and off kind of up and down relationship. So I don't know, maybe there is something to this, and Brandy might have been involved with Cory somewhere along the way. But when it was time for the rebuttal, the prosecution talked about how that theory was impossible, and that the murder really just boiled down to money, saying this was not hate. This was pure greed. And sort of like that theory about Adele being jealous, I can see this one too. Cory needed money. He was in a lot of debt. He was behind on his mortgage by $62,000. And let's not ignore that he was looking up all of those luxury cars after Brandy's murder. So obviously he knew that money was coming his way, which, it means that he must have also known that Adele had bought those life insurance policies and she was about to collect on them. Not to mention all of the text messages that they had, including the coded one about the Ugg boots. So I suppose it's possible that both theories were true. Maybe Cory had killed Brandy because he wanted money, but Adele was in it more because she was jealous. People can have more than one motive. But still, the prosecution didn't want to leave anything to chance. They didn't want to risk even the possibility that jurors might think that Adele was behind everything and give a not guilty verdict because of it. So they decided to bring out a key witness, an old friend of Cory's named Samson Alabi. Samson testified that Cory had told him about his plans with the insurance fraud and the murder well before it went down. He said that Cory had asked him if he could pretend to rob their home while Brandy was there, then shoot her to death, staging it like it was a robbery gone bad. Sampson told Cory absolutely not. He was definitely not going to help him out with that. Now, of course, the problem with that story was that Sampson apparently knew Cory was planning to kill Brandy, but he never went to the police with what he knew until well after the fact. He was even arrested in the summer of 2018, and he had a huge opportunity to talk at the time. Maybe he could have even shared some of the tips then as some sort of deal to get out of whatever charges he was facing, but he chose to just keep his mouth shut. In fact, by the time of Sampson's arrest, the police already knew that Cory and Adele were suspects, and they also knew that Sampson knew them. So they asked him during the interrogation if he knew anything about Brandy's murder, but he said that he hadn't heard anything. So that left Sampson looking not very credible on the stand, as you can imagine. Adele also testified as part of her plea deal. She talked about how she would watch true crime shows with Cory, get ideas for how to get away with the murder. She also told the jury that while Cory was dismembering Brandy in the bathroom, he wore a black jogger suit and Timberland boots, and that every time he left the bathroom to take a break, he would strip completely out of it so that he would not track any blood or evidence into the rest of the house. So it really goes to show that Cory was taking every measure he could to not get caught. Adele also talked about how Cory was physically abusive towards her, emotionally abusive, all of it. So even though Cory's lawyers tried to make the whole thing sound like some sort of love triangle gone wrong, there was just too much evidence proving that he was in it for the money. The jury found him guilty on all counts: for aggravated identity theft, fraudulent use of identification, murder for hire conspiracy, and wire fraud conspiracy. Cory's charges mean that he's getting a mandatory life sentence. We're just going to have to wait for everything to be official once he goes to his sentencing hearing, which is scheduled for July of 2024. His fate, though, has been sealed either way. And an attorney more or less announced that Cory was going away for life the same day that he got his guilty verdict. In his statement, he said, "It is fitting that Martin faces a mandatory sentence to spend the rest of his life in prison for this ghastly, cold-blooded crime that was motivated by greed and executed after extensive planning. Martin saw the victim as a moneymaker, trafficking her for commercial sex, and then after killing her with his bare hands, tossing out her slaughtered body parts like trash so that he could profit from her death. Brandy Odom suffered an unthinkable death at the defendant's hands, but her life mattered, and I hope that this verdict holding the defendant responsible brings some measure of closure to her family." Brandy's mom, Nicole, had her own thoughts after the trial, saying, "I waited 6 years. That's one monster that's off the street right now, because that's what he is right now. He's a monster. Having to hear what I listened to during these past 2 weeks of the trial, it's a mother's worst nightmare. So I'm glad that they came up with the verdict that they did, to make sure that it doesn't happen to anybody else's child." Adele took the plea bargain, as we know, but she hasn't gone to sentencing yet either. And I'm curious what you guys think she should get based on her involvement in all of this. I mean, she played such a significant role in Brandy's death and with the premeditation elements of it. I mean, sure, she didn't kill Brandy herself, but she knew that Cory was going to kill her, and she helped him every single step of the way. I don't know Brandy's whole story and what got her to the point where she was a sex worker under Cory's control, but what I do know about Brandy is that she genuinely was trying to escape her bad situation. She didn't just have the dream of something better, she was actively working toward that dream every single day. I mean, she was accepted into cosmetology school, she was possibly going to become a school safety officer, and she was also thinking about pursuing a career as a flight attendant. She was doing all that she could with the resources that she had. But sadly, the people around her in her life didn't want things to get better for her. They just wanted to use her for their own gain. And it's beyond tragic that while her life was going down such a dark path, her family just had no idea what she was going through. I have to think that if she could have just reached out to her mother or to somebody else who had her best interests at heart, that maybe things could have played out differently. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, it stood out to me that Cory and Adele watched crime shows to get idea on how to get away with murder. I mean, the good news is that it didn't work out for them. They eventually got caught. But it did take the police years of digging to find enough evidence to actually arrest either one of them. We all watch true crime stuff, and I do this channel for victim advocacy. But it's scary to think that there are some sick individuals and twisted individuals out there who might be studying and researching these videos to figure out how to get away with things. So hopefully we'll get Brandy's name out there and make sure that her story is told better than it was, because like I said, her mom does not think that it was handled the right way, and she believes that race had a lot to do with that. And I'm curious to see if there are any more twists during Cory's sentencing hearing that we'll hear. I really do have some mixed feelings about Adele and her plea deal, even though we don't know exactly what it involves yet, but I'm wondering what you guys think about all of this. So let me know in the comment section below. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of 10 to Life, and until the next one, stay safe.